I put my pregnant sister behind bars after she spent months drugging my tea to steal my inheritance and my husband. And I am the only one who knows she is going to lose her baby to the foster care system the moment it is born. I thought I was saving Annie when I opened my door to her that rainy night, but I had no idea I was welcoming a parasite who would systematically poison my mind and frame my innocent husband just because she was jealous of the life our parents left to me. She wore my silk dresses while I was passed out from her sedatives. She whispered lies to my neighbors to paint me as insane, and she nearly succeeded in taking everything I own. I had to become heartless to survive her, and now that she is locked away for 8 years, I am left holding a secret that feels heavier than any weapon. She thinks she is just serving time, but she does not know that her child will grow up with strangers because I chose not to tell the authorities about her condition. I stare at her letters begging for forgiveness, and I feel nothing but a hollow, aching void in my chest where my heart used to be. Is it justice to let her suffer like this? Or have I become just as cruel as the woman who tried to destroy me? Please tell me, did I take my revenge too far? My name is Eliana Sterling. Everyone calls me Ellie. I am 28 years old, and I work as a freelance interior designer, curating spaces for people who have more money than taste. I am married to Mark, a man so steady and good that sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night just to check if he is still breathing beside me. We live in Westport, Connecticut, in a sprawling colonial revival estate that sits on 2 acres of manicured lawn. Hidden behind a wrought iron gate, it is the kind of house that screams old money and generational stability. But the truth is, I often feel like a fraud living here. This house was not bought with my earnings. It was inherited. My parents left everything to me. The house, the stocks, the vintage car collection. Bypassing my older sister entirely, they said I was the responsible one, the stable one. They said my sister was a wildfire that would burn everything down. I should have listened to them. It was a Tuesday night in mid-November when the peace of my life began to crack. The rain was hammering against the double-pane windows of the living room, a relentless rhythm that usually made me feel safe and enclosed. I was sitting on the beige linen sofa, sketching a layout for a client in Greenwich, while Mark was reading a biography of some forgotten president by the fireplace. The gas fire hissed softly, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. It was perfect. It was quiet. It was everything I ever wanted. Then, the doorbell rang. It was not a polite delivery driver ring. It was a long, desperate press that echoed through the high ceilings of the foyer. Mark looked up, frowning. He checked his watch. It was past 9 of the clock. I will get it, I said, setting my sketchbook aside. When I opened the heavy oak door, the wind whipped rain into the hallway, soaking the hardwood floor. Standing there, shivering in a thin denim jacket that was soaked through to the skin, was Annie, my sister. She looked small, smaller than I remembered. Her blonde hair was matted to her skull, mascara running down her cheeks like black tears. Beside her was a single, battered suitcase with a broken zipper, its contents spilling out slightly onto my porch. Ellie, she choked out, her teeth chattering violently. He threw me out. He took everything. Please, I have nowhere to go. My heart seized. The old, familiar guilt washed over me instantly. Here I was, warm and dry in a $3 million home, while my sister was standing in a hurricane. I did not even think. I did not assess the situation. I just reached out and pulled her inside. Oh my God. Annie, come in. I said, my voice trembling. Mark appeared behind me in the hallway. I saw his posture stiffen the moment he saw her. His jaw tightened, a subtle sign of displeasure that only a wife would notice. He did not trust Annie. He never had, but Mark was polite to a fault. He nodded at her, keeping his distance. Hello, Annie, Mark said, his tone devoid of warmth but lacking open hostility. Hey, Mark, Annie whispered, hugging herself. She did not look him in the eye. Instead, her gaze darted past him, scanning the foyer, the crystal chandelier above us, the artwork on the walls. It was a hungry look, sharp and calculating, but it vanished as soon as she looked back at me. I rushed to get her towels and a robe. I made her hot tea with lemon and honey. I bustled around her like a mother hen, desperate to fix whatever was broken. When she was finally dry and sitting in our kitchen, wrapping her hands around the ceramic mug, the dynamic shifted. You have done a lot with the place, Annie said. Her voice was scratchy. She ran a finger along the edge of the marble island. This is Calicut gold marble, is it not? Must have cost a fortune. It was here when we moved in. I lied softly, downplaying the renovation costs because I felt ashamed of my wealth in front of her poverty. Must be nice, she muttered, taking a sip of tea. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she looked at me. You look good, Ellie. You have gained weight, good weight. I mean, you look Haling. Two hash is greater than well fed. I shifted uncomfortably on the bar stool. Thanks, I said. So, what happened with Dave? Annie scoffed, a harsh sound that seemed too loud for the room. He is a psycho, just like Dad was. He started controlling everything. My money, my phone. I had to run. I did not even have time to pack properly. I felt a pang of sympathy. I reached out and touched her hand. You are safe here. Annie, you can stay as long as you need. I felt Mark's presence in the doorway before I saw him. He cleared his throat. We can set up the guest suite in the east wing, Mark said. It is private. You will have your own space. Annie turned to look at him, and for a split second, I saw a flash of something unrecognizable in her eyes. It was not gratitude. It looked like amusement. The guest suite? She repeated, testing the words. That is the one with the garden view, right? The one Mom used to say was too nice for visitors. It is just a room, Annie, I said quickly. It is comfortable. She smiled then, but it did not reach her eyes. Of course, it is just a room. Thank you, little sister. You always get the best of everything, do you not? Even the husband. The comment hung in the air, awkward and sharp. I forced a laugh, trying to brush it off as a joke. Mark did not laugh. He walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. Let us get you settled, Mark said firmly. Later that night, after Annie had gone into the guest room and the house was quiet again, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Mark was already asleep, his breathing rhythmic and steady, but I could not sleep. I felt a strange unease in my gut, a biological alarm bell ringing in the distance. I got up to get a glass of water. As I walked silently down the hallway, the floorboards cold beneath my bare feet, I noticed the door to the guest room was slightly ajar. The light was off, but I could see a silhouette standing by the window. It was Annie. She was not sleeping. She was standing there, perfectly still, staring out into the dark hallway. She was not looking at the front door. She was not looking at the garden. Her head was turned, her gaze fixed intently on the door to the master bedroom. My bedroom. She stood there for a long time, motionless like a statue. I held my breath, hiding in the shadows of the landing. Finally, she stepped back and closed the door with a soft, deliberate click. I shivered, pulling my silk robe tighter around me. It was just trauma, I told myself. She was just scared and disoriented. She was my sister. She was family. But as I walked back to my bed, I realized I had locked our bedroom door from the inside. It was something I had never done in 5 years of marriage, and that small, silent click of the lock felt like the first admission that the safety of my home had been breached. 2 weeks had passed since Annie arrived, and the atmosphere in our home had shifted. It was subtle at first, like a change in air pressure before a storm. My sanctuary, once a place of stillness and order, now felt crowded. It was not just her physical presence, it was the way she occupied space. She did not walk through the rooms. She claimed them. I came home early from a client meeting on a Thursday afternoon. The heavy oak front door clicked shut behind me, and immediately, a scent hit my nose. It was Santal, 33, my perfume. It was the signature scent Mark had bought me for our first anniversary, a bottle that cost nearly $300. I frowned, dropping my keys into the ceramic bowl on the console table. "Annie?" I called out. There was no answer. I walked into the living room, and my breath hitched in my throat. Annie was lounging on the chaise longue by the window, flipping through a magazine. She was wearing my emerald green silk slip dress. It was a delicate, intimate piece of clothing that I only wore for Mark on special occasions. The silk clung to her body, and for a sickening moment, I realized she looked good in it, perhaps even better than I did. She looked natural, as if the dress, and the room, and the view of the manicured garden belonged to her. She looked up, unbothered. "Oh, Haley, you are home early." I stood frozen, clutching my handbag. "Annie, that is my dress. And are you wearing my perfume?" She sat up, smoothing the fabric over her thighs with a casual entitlement that made my stomach churn. She did not look apologetic. She looked annoyed that I had noticed. "I spilled coffee on my shirt," she said, shrugging. It was the only clean thing I could find in the laundry room. "I did not think you would mind. You have so many clothes. Ellie, you probably have not worn this in years." "I have, actually," I said, my voice tight. "It is. Saúde howling. Dos numeral. Es mayor que personal. God. Relax." She laughed, standing up. "It is just a dress. You always were so possessive. Mom used to say you never learned how to share." That stung. The mention of our mother was a calculated strike. Annie knew exactly where my buttons were, and she pressed them with surgical precision. I felt the familiar wave of guilt wash over me. She was right, I told myself. I had a closet full of designer clothes. She had one suitcase of rags. Was I really going to be the selfish sister who begrudged her a piece of fabric? "I am sorry," I muttered, hating myself for apologizing. "Just Saúde. 2 hash is greater than please ask next time." Later that evening, the tension in the house was palpable. Mark was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner with a little more force than necessary. The knife hit the cutting board with sharp, rhythmic thuds. Annie was sitting at the island, watching him. She was still wearing my dress, though she had thrown a cardigan over it. I sat at the dining table, going over some invoices, but I could not focus. My head felt heavy. Lately, I had been feeling a strange, persistent fog. Here, drink this. Annie placed a steaming mug in front of me. It smelled earthy and pungent. What is it? I asked, rubbing my temples. Just a special herbal blend, she said softly, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. It helps with stress. You look exhausted. Ellie, you work too hard to maintain this lifestyle. Let your big sister take care of you. I looked up at her. Her eyes were wide and concerned. For a moment, I saw the sister I used to adore when we were children. Before life and resentment tore us apart, I took the mug and drank. The liquid was bitter, but warmth spread through my chest. Within 20 minutes, my eyelids felt like lead. The edges of the room began to blur. I am going to lie down for a bit, I murmured, standing up unsteadily. As I walked toward the hallway, I glanced back. Mark was standing by the stove, his back rigid. Annie had moved closer to him. She was leaning over the counter, whispering something I could not hear. I saw her hand reach out and brush against his lower back, a touch that lingered a second too long to be accidental. Mark flinched and moved away, but my drugged brain could not process what I was seeing. I told myself I was imagining things. 2 hours later, Mark came into our bedroom. I was awake, but barely. I was lying in the dark, floating in that strange gray space between sleep and consciousness. Mark closed the door and locked it. That sound again, the click of the lock. He did not turn on the lights. He walked to the side of the bed and sat down heavily. Ellie, we need to talk, he said. His voice was low, vibrating with suppressed anger. I mumbled, rolling over to face him. She has to go, Mark said. I forced my eyes open, trying to focus on his silhouette. What? Who? Annie, he said. I want her out. Tonight, or tomorrow morning at the latest. Why? I sat up, fighting the dizziness. Mark, she has nowhere to go. It is raining. She is my sister. She touched me. Ellie, the words hung in the dark room. My heart skipped a beat, but then the denial kicked in. The defense mechanism that had protected me from painful truths my whole life reared its head. What do you mean? Touched you? I asked, my voice defensive. Like Saoud Singh Haling, 2# is greater than bumped into you? No, Mark said sharply. Not bumped. She came up behind me while I was cooking. She pressed herself against me. She ran her hand down my arm and asked if I was happy. She asked if you were enough for me. I stared at him. A cold knot formed in my stomach, but instead of getting angry at Annie, I felt a surge of irritation toward Mark. It felt easier to blame him than to accept that my sister was a predator. You are exaggerating, I said, my voice sounding slurry. She is just lonely. Mark, she is traumatized from her divorce. She probably just wanted comfort. You are a man. You are misinterpreting her need for safety as Saoud Singh Haling, 2# is greater than something else. Mark stood up abruptly. The mattress shifted violently with his movement. I am not misinterpreting anything. Eliana, he snapped. I am a grown man. I know the difference between a cry for help and a pass. She is playing you. She is wearing your clothes, drinking your wine, and now she is testing your marriage, and you are too blind to see it. She is my family. I raised my voice, the guilt morphing into anger. You just never liked her. You think she is trash because she is poor. Silence filled the room. It was a thick, suffocating silence. I heard Mark exhale slowly, a sound of profound disappointment. "Fine," he whispered, "have it your way. But do not say I did not warn you." He walked to the bathroom and slammed the door. I fell back onto the pillows, my head spinning from the argument and the tea. I felt a tear slide down my temple. I told myself Mark was being cruel. I told myself Annie was just a broken bird that needed healing. But deep down, in the part of my mind that the herbs could not silence, a small voice was screaming. It was screaming that the wolf was already inside the house, and I had just locked the sheep in with it. The following week passed in a blur of tension so thick it felt like I was wading through quicksand. The air in the house was heavy, charged with unspoken accusations and resentments that seemed to cling to the walls like damp mold. I tried to maintain the facade of normalcy. I went to my meetings. I sketched floor plans for the renovation in Greenwich, and I cooked dinner every night. But nothing was normal. Mark had retreated into a shell of icy silence. He spent more time at the office, coming home late and leaving early, avoiding Annie as if she were a carrier of some contagious disease. Annie, on the other hand, flourished. She moved through the house with a growing confidence, humming soft tunes under her breath, her presence expanding until it felt like there was no room left for me. It was a Friday evening when the dam finally broke. Mark came home around 8 of the clock. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened. His eyes were bloodshot, and he carried the weariness of a man who dreaded walking through his own front door. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, while Annie was in the living room watching television. The volume was turned up too high, the canned laughter of a sitcom grating on my nerves. "I am going to take a shower," Mark muttered as he passed me. He did not kiss me hello. He barely looked at me. "Okay," I said softly to his retreating back. "I will heat up some dinner for you." He did not answer. I heard his heavy footsteps trudging up the stairs, followed by the sound of the bedroom door closing. I say Hill, turning off the faucet. I felt a profound sadness settling in my chest, a mourning for the intimacy we had lost in such a short time. 5 minutes later, a scream tore through the house. It was not a cry of surprise. It was a shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. It was the kind of sound that triggers a primal instinct in the brain, bypassing logic entirely. 小雨静好令 to Mark? It was Annie's voice. It was coming from upstairs. I dropped the dish towel and sprinted. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I took the stairs, 2 at a time, stumbling on the landing before rushing toward the master bedroom. The door was wide open. The scream had come from the master bathroom. I ran inside, and the scene that greeted me froze the blood in my veins. The bathroom was filled with steam. Mark was standing by the sink, his face a mask of shock and confusion. He was fully dressed, save for his jacket, which he had thrown on the vanity. His hands were raised in a defensive posture, palms out across the room. Huddled in the corner near the bathtub was Annie. She was stark naked. She was clutching a towel to her chest with trembling hands, her body shaking violently. Her wet hair was plastered to her face, and her eyes were wide with a look of absolute horror. "Get out," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Mark. "Get away from me. What is going on?" I yelled, my voice cracking. Mark turned to me, his eyes desperate. "Ellie, I swear to God." I walked in, and she was just 小雨静好令. Tuhash is greater than she was in here. The door was not locked. I did not know. "Liar," Annie shrieked. Tears were streaming down her face now. mixing with the water dripping from her hair. You knew I was taking a bath. You walked in and you stood there. You just stared at me. I did not. Mark roared, his composure finally snapping. Why are you in my bathroom? Annie, you have your own bathroom downstairs. The water pressure is better here. Annie sobbed, turning her gaze to me. I just wanted a hot bath. Ellie, I did not think he would. So yu ting hao ling. Tuhash is greater than I did not think he would come in like that. He had this look in his eyes. So yu jing hao ling. Jing hao da yu. I looked back and forth between them. My husband, the man I had trusted with my life, and my sister, the victim who had come to me for safety. My head began to spin. The herbal tea Annie had given me earlier sat heavy in my stomach, making my thoughts sluggish and disjointed. Mark, get out, I whispered. Ellie, listen to me, Mark pleaded, stepping toward me. This is a setup. She is doing this on purpose. I said, get out. I screamed, my voice echoing off the tiled walls. Just go downstairs. Mark looked at me with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. He shook his head slowly, jaw clenched, and stormed out of the bathroom, slamming the bedroom door behind him so hard the pictures on the walls rattled. The silence that followed was broken only by Annie's jagged breathing. I grabbed a bathrobe from the hook, my bathrobe, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. It is okay, I soothed, stroking her wet hair. I am here. You are safe. I helped her up and led her to the bed. She sat on the edge, clutching the robe tightly, looking small and broken. I sat beside her, my mind racing. I wanted to believe Mark. I desperately wanted to believe that this was all a misunderstanding, a terrible accident. Mark was a good man. He was a gentleman. But then, Annie looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. He has been doing it all week. Ellie, she whispered. My heart stopped. What? So yu ting hao ling. Tuhash is greater than he finds me when you are not around. She stammered, her voice trembling. When you are asleep, when you are working in your office, he corners me. He makes comments. No, I shook my head, denial rising in my throat like bile. Mark would not. He loves me, does he? Annie asked. Her voice suddenly dropped, becoming serious and intense. Look at this, Ellie. She loosened the robe and pulled it down over her left shoulder. So yu ting hao ling. Dos numeral is mayor que, I gasped. There, on her upper arm, were 3 distinct bruises. They were dark, purple, and ugly, the shape of fingertips, the marks of a hand grabbing someone too hard. He grabbed me yesterday in the laundry room. Annie cried, tracing the bruises with her finger. He told me that if I said anything to you, he would kick me out. He said nobody would believe a homeless charity case over a successful businessman. He said you were too stupid to ever doubt him. I stared at the bruises. They were real. They were physical, undeniable proof etched into her skin. My world tilted on its axis. The image of Mark, my gentle, loving Mark, began to warp and distort. Could I really know him? Could a monster hide behind a smile that perfect? Inner monologue. I felt a sickness spread through my gut. A cold, creeping realization that I was the fool everyone warned me about. I was the rich girl living in a bubble, oblivious to the darkness right under my nose. Mark called me stupid? Is that what he really thought of me? That I was just a naive child playing house with daddy's money? It made sense. It made terrible, painful sense. Why would Annie lie? What did she have to gain by destroying her own sanctuary? She was my sister. She shared my blood. Mark was just a man. I am so sorry. Annie, I whispered, tears welling in my own eyes now. I did not know. I am so sorry. Annie leaned her head on my shoulder, burying her face in my neck. It is not your fault, she murmured, her voice muffled against my skin. Men are all the same. Ellie, they take what they want. Dad was like that. Dave was like that. And now Mark, you and I, Sao Tsing Haoling. 2# is greater than we only have each other. We are the only ones who can protect each other. I held her tighter, a fierce protectiveness surging through me. I looked at the closed door where my husband had exited, and for the first time in my life, I felt a flash of pure hatred toward him. He had hurt her. He had hurt my sister in my own home, under my protection. You are right, I said, my voice hardening. We only have each other. I stayed with her until she fell asleep in my bed. I watched her chest rise and fall, marveling at how fragile she looked. I did not go downstairs to find Mark. I did not ask for his side of the story. The bruises were the only story I needed. That night, I slept in the guest room, the room Annie was supposed to occupy. I lay in the dark, staring at the unfamiliar shadows, feeling the foundations of my marriage crumbling beneath me. Down the hall, my sister slept in the master suite, in my bed, wrapped in my sheets, and downstairs, my husband slept in his study, an outcast in his own home. I did not know it then, but the transfer of power had already begun. I had handed Annie the keys to the kingdom, and I had done it willingly, blinded by a loyalty that would nearly cost me my life. The house began to feel less like a home and more like a mausoleum. The silence that filled the hallways was not peaceful. It was heavy and suffocating, thick with unspoken accusations. Mark had become a ghost in his own life. He slept in the study on the leather sofa, leaving for the office before the sun came up and returning only when the house was dark. We passed each other like strangers in the kitchen, avoiding eye contact, the air between us crackling with a cold, static tension. I was unraveling. The days blurred together in a gray haze. I found myself losing track of time, forgetting appointments, and misplacing simple things like my keys or my phone. Annie told me it was stress. She said my body was shutting down from the trauma of realizing my husband was a predator. She was always there with a solution, usually in the form of a steaming mug of her special herbal tea. Here, drink this, she would say, her voice soothing and melodic. It will help you sleep. It will clear the fog. I drank it religiously. It tasted bitter, like earth and old roots, but I trusted her. I trusted the sister who held my hand while I cried over a marriage I thought was perfect. But instead of clearing the fog, the tea seemed to thicken it. My limbs felt heavy, and my thoughts moved through syrup. I felt docilely, pliable, and constantly exhausted. One afternoon, I was sitting in the sunroom, staring blankly at the garden. The hydrangeas were wilting, their blue heads bowing toward the ground. Annie walked in, carrying a basket of laundry. My laundry. She sat down opposite me, folding one of my cashmere sweaters with slow, deliberate movements. You know, Ellie, she started, her tone casual. I have been thinking about your future. My future? I repeated, my tongue feeling thick. With Mark, she said, smoothing a wrinkle in the fabric. You cannot stay married to him. Not after what he did to me. Not after what he is doing to your mental health. I looked down at my hands. The wedding ring on my finger felt like a heavy shackle. I know, I whispered. I just, Sao Yu Tsing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than I do not know how to start. It is complicated. The house, the assets, Sao Yu Tsing Hao Ling, are Tsing Hao Da Yu. That is exactly why you need to protect yourself, Annie said, leaning forward. Her eyes were sharp, devoid of the sympathy she usually projected. Do you have a copy of the will? Mom and Dad's will? Why? I asked, a flicker of confusion piercing through the haze. Because men like Mark will try to take everything. She said quickly, he will try to claim he contributed to the house. He will try to declare you mentally incompetent so he can control your inheritance. You need to make sure the property stays in the bloodline. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Her grip was tight, bordering on painful. If you are not strong enough to handle this right now, Ellie, you can sign over temporary guardianship to me, just for the assets. Just until the divorce is final. I can protect the house for us. Sao Yu Tsing Hao Ling. 2. For us. The words echoed in my mind. For a second, something felt wrong. Why would I give my sister guardianship? I was 28 years old, not a child. But then the fatigue washed over me again, and her logic seemed sound. She was the strong one. I was the weak, broken wife. I will think about it, I murmured. Later that afternoon, I went outside to get the mail. The fresh air hit my face, providing a brief moment of clarity. Mrs. Norma, our next-door neighbor, was out pruning her rose bushes. She was a sharp woman in her 60s who saw everything that happened on our street. She straightened up when she saw me, pulling off her gardening gloves. Eliana, she called out. I walked over to the low stone wall that separated our properties. Hi, Mrs. Norma, you do not look well. Dear, she said bluntly, peering at me over her reading glasses. You look pale, and you have lost weight. I have just been under the weather. I lead, forcing a smile. And your guest? Mrs. Norma asked, her eyes narrowing. Your sister? She seems to be making herself quite comfortable. I saw her driving your convertible yesterday. She was wearing a very large hat and sunglasses, looking like she owned the whole neighborhood. She is just borrowing it, I said defensively. She is going through a hard time. Mrs. Norma hummed, a sound of distinct disapproval. You know, Ilyana, people grieve in different ways. But usually, when a woman is running from a violent ex-husband, she does not parade around town looking like she just won the lottery. Just be careful. Vultures often look like songbirds until they start peeking at the carcasses. I stiffened. Annie is not a vulture. She is family. Mrs. Norma just looked at me with pity. Sometimes, family is the most dangerous kind of stranger. Honey, I turned and walked back to the house, my heart pounding. I was angry at Mrs. Norma. How dare she judge us? She did not know what Annie had been through. She did not see the bruises, but as I walked through the front door, the doubt lingered. I walked into the kitchen and froze. Annie was on the phone. Her back was to me, and she did not hear me enter. Her voice was different. It was not the soft, trembling voice of a victim. It was loud, brash, and excited. I am telling you, it is only a matter of time. She was saying into the receiver, she is a mess. Total zombie mode. I will have the papers signed by the end of the month. Yeah, the whole estate. Mark is already sleeping in the doghouse. He is done. I stepped on a loose floorboard, and it creaked. Annie spun around. Her eyes went wide. and she immediately hung up the phone, shoving it into her pocket. "Ellie," she exclaimed, her face instantly morphing into a mask of concern. "You scared me. I was just... So you Hao Ling. 2# is greater than talking to a lawyer. About my divorce. Who were you talking to?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You sounded... So you Hao Ling. 2# is greater than happy. I was just putting on a brave face," she said, walking toward me. She reached out to touch my arm, but I flinched. Annie stopped, her expression hardening for a fraction of a second before softening again. "You need your tea. Ellie, you are shaking. You are paranoid again. Come on, let me make you a fresh cup." I looked at her, and then I looked at the kettle on the stove. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to run. But the exhaustion was so deep, so bone-crushing, that I could not fight it. "Okay," I whispered, surrendering, just a small cup. As I sat there, watching my sister brew the poison that was slowly erasing me, I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I was losing my husband. I was losing my home. And worst of all, I was losing myself. The spiral was gaining speed, and I no longer knew how to stop it. The tension in the house snapped on a Tuesday evening. It did not break slowly. It shattered like a glass thrown against a brick wall. I was sitting at the kitchen island, staring into a cup of chamomile tea that Annie had just placed in front of me. The steam rose in curling wisps, carrying that familiar, earthy scent that had become the soundtrack to my lethargy. My head felt heavy, filled with cotton wool. Mark had come home early, which was unusual for him lately. He walked into the kitchen with a strange energy. He was not slumping with defeat anymore. His spine was straight, his movements precise and predatory. He did not look at me. He looked straight at Annie. "Do not drink that, Ellie," Mark said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. I looked up, blinking slowly. "What?" I said. "Do not drink it." Mark walked over to the counter where Annie was standing. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression shifting from surprise to a sneer of defiance. "What is your problem, Mark?" Annie asked, leaning her hip against the marble. "Trying to control what your wife eats and drinks now? Is that the new abuse tactic?" Mark ignored her. He reached up to the top of the kitchen cabinets, behind a decorative vase that had been there for years. He pulled down a small, black object. It was a portable camera. I stopped breathing. "I have been recording this room for 3 days," Mark said, holding the device up. "I saw you, Annie. I saw you take that little glass vial out of your bra. I saw you tap the powder into Ellie's cup. I saw you stir it in." The silence that followed was absolute. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked. My heart hammered against my ribs, hard and painful. "Powder?" I whispered, looking down at the tea. "Annie, she is drugging you." "Ileana," Mark said, his eyes never leaving my sister. "That is why you are sick. That is why you cannot think straight. She is poisoning you." Annie let out a sharp, high-pitched laugh. It sounded manic. "You are delusional? It is just supplements, vitamins. She needs them because you are draining the life out of her. Then you will not mind if we give this to the police for testing," Mark said. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket. "I am calling 911. You are leaving this house in handcuffs." "Annie?" For a second, Annie froze. I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. It was like watching a computer process a million variables in a microsecond. She looked at the camera in Mark's hand. She looked at the phone. She looked at me, sitting uselessly on the stool. She realized she had lost. And then the world exploded. No, Annie screamed. She lunged, not at Mark, but at the knife block on the counter. She grabbed the paring knife, the one with the sharp, serrated edge. Before I could even process what was happening, she drew the blade across her own forearm. Blood sprayed onto the white marble countertop. It was bright crimson, shocking and violent against the pristine stone. "Oh my God," I shrieked, sliding off the stool. "Annie," she did not stop. She turned and swept her arm across the counter, sending the ceramic fruit bowl crashing to the floor. Oranges and apples rolled everywhere. Shards of pottery skittered across the hardwood. "He is killing me," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Help, he is killing me." Mark stood frozen, the phone still in his hand, his face a mask of absolute shock. "What are you doing?" "Stop it." Annie threw herself against the refrigerator, slamming her body into the metal with a sickening thud. She ripped her own blouse, tearing the buttons off so they scattered like hail. Then, with blood dripping from her arm, she grabbed the landline from the wall and dialed 3 numbers. 911. "Please help," Annie wailed into the receiver, her voice breaking into hysterical sobs. "My brother-in-law, Sao Yijing Haoling, 2 hashes greater than he has a knife. He cut me. He is going to kill us. Please hurry." She dropped the phone and collapsed onto the floor, curling into a ball amidst the broken pottery and fruit. She looked up at me, her eyes wild, her face streaked with tears and blood. "Run, Ellie, run. He is crazy." I stood in the middle of the kitchen, paralyzed. My brain could not make sense of the visual input. Mark was holding a camera. Annie was bleeding. The room was destroyed. The logic circuits in my mind, dampened by weeks of sedatives, misfired completely. "Annie, stop." "Sao Yijing Haoling, 2 hash is greater than," I whispered. Swaying on my feet, Mark finally moved. He took a step toward her, reaching out a hand. "Annie, put pressure on that wound. You are bleeding out." "Sao Yijing Haoling, Jing Hao Dayu, stay away from her," I screamed. I did not know why I said it. It was instinct. I saw my sister bleeding on the floor, and I saw my husband standing over her. The context of the powder and the camera vanished, replaced by the visceral horror of blood. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every second. They were coming. Mark looked at me, betrayal etched into every line of his face. "Ellie, look at me. She did this herself. You saw it." Sao Yijing Haoling, 2 hash is greater than I do not know. "Sao Yijing Haoling." 2 I stammered, holding my head. The front door burst open. Blue and red lights flashed through the hallway, bouncing off the walls like a strobe light in a nightmare. Police officers stormed in, guns drawn, shouting commands. "Drop the weapon. Drop it now." Mark looked at his hands. He was holding his phone and the small camera. He put them on the island slowly, raising his hands in the air. "She cut herself," Mark said, his voice steady but desperate. "I have it on video. Get on the ground." The officer roared. They tackled him. My husband, the man who wore suits and read biographies by the fire, was slammed face first into the hardwood floor. I heard the click of handcuffs. I saw a knee pressed into his back. "Check the camera," Mark yelled, his face pressed against the floorboards. "It is on the counter." The black camera. Paramedics rushed past the officers, swarming around Annie. She was sobbing, pointing at Mark with a trembling, bloody hand. He tried to stab me. She choked out. He said, "Xiao Yu Jinghao Ling." 2 hashes greater than he said I was in the way. I stood in the corner, shaking uncontrollably. An officer approached me, guiding me away from the scene. "Madam, come with me. You are safe now." I looked back as they dragged Mark out the front door. He twisted his head around to look at me. His eyes were wide, pleading, desperate. "Eliana, get the camera. Do not let her touch it." The door slammed shut. The house was suddenly filled with strangers. Police radios chattered. Paramedics lifted Annie onto a stretcher. I looked at the kitchen island. The fruit bowl was gone. The knife was bagged as evidence, but the small black camera was gone. I scanned the counter frantically. It was not there. I looked at the floor. Nothing. My gaze drifted to the stretcher as they wheeled Annie out. She was strapped down, an oxygen mask over her face. As she passed me, her head lolled to the side. Her eyes met mine for a split second. Behind the tears and the mask, I saw it, a glint of triumph, and I noticed her hand, the one not injured, was clenched tight into a fist under the sheet, holding something small and hard. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell the officer to stop the stretcher, but the words died in my throat. My legs gave out, and I slid down the wall to the floor, darkness finally swallowing me whole. The silence that descended upon the house after the police cars departed was heavier than any silence I had ever known. It was not peaceful. It was the suffocating, ringing silence of a battlefield after the cannons have stopped firing. The flashing blue and red lights that had danced across my living room walls were gone, replaced by the cold, indifferent moonlight streaming through the windows. I sat on the kitchen floor for what felt like hours. The orange juice from the smashed fruit bowl had dried into a sticky mess on the hardwood, mixing with the dark, copper-colored smear of my sister's blood. The police had taken Mark. They had handcuffed him. My Mark, who carefully moved spiders outside rather than killing them, and dragged him out like a common criminal. I could still hear his voice echoing in the empty hall, pleading with me to find the camera. But there was no camera. I had searched. I had crawled on my hands and knees, ignoring the glass shards that bit into my skin, looking under the island, behind the refrigerator, inside the trash can. It was gone, and with it, the only tether to a reality where my husband was innocent had snapped. Annie returned the next morning. I expected her to be broken. I expected a shell of a woman, traumatized by the violence she claimed to have endured. I had prepared the guest room with fresh linens and lavender essential oils, ready to nurse her back to health. The front door opened. I stood up from the sofa, my joints stiff, my eyes swollen from crying. "Annie?" I whispered. She walked in. Her left forearm was heavily bandaged, a stark white contrast against her skin. But she was not limping. She was not hunched over. She walked with a stride that was terrifyingly confident. Her head was held high, her spine straight. She did not look at me. She walked past me, straight into the kitchen, and opened the wine fridge. She pulled out a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, a bottle Mark had been saving for our 10th anniversary. It was worth $400. "Annie, that is Mark's," I said weakly. She ignored me. She found the corkscrew, opened the bottle with practiced ease, and poured herself a generous glass. She took a long, slow sip, closing her eyes as if savoring a victory. Then, she turned to look at me. Her eyes were clear. The tears were gone. The fear was gone. In their place was a look of cold, Hard satisfaction. He is not coming back. Ellie, she said flatly. The judge set bail at $500,000, and given the flight risk and the severity of the assault, he is going to be in county lockup for a long time before trial. How? So you think how, Lean? 2 hash is greater than how do you know that? I asked, my voice trembling. I have been doing my research, she said, taking another sip. She walked past me again, heading toward the stairs. I followed her, confused and desperate. Where are you going? The guest room is ready. I am not sleeping in that closet anymore. She threw over her shoulder. It smells like mothballs and charity. I need space to heal. I need comfort. She walked straight into the master bedroom. My bedroom. The room I had shared with Mark for 5 years. The sanctuary where we had whispered our dreams in the dark. Annie. No, I pleaded, stopping at the threshold. That is my room. Not anymore, she said. She placed her wine glass on the nightstand. Mark's nightstand. Then, she opened my closet doors. She began pulling things out. My silk blouses, my designer coats, the cashmere throws. She tossed them onto the floor in a pile, like she was sorting through trash. What are you doing? I cried, rushing forward to grab a sweater she had just dropped. Making room, she said calmly. Mark's stuff is depressing me. It has got to go. Pack it up. Ellie, put it in the garage. Or burn it. I do not care. I stared at her, unable to comprehend the transformation. This was not the trembling woman who had begged for shelter from the rain. This was an invader. You cannot do this. I whispered, this is my house. Is it? Annie turned to face me. She leaned against the closet door, crossing her arms. The bandage on her arm was prominently displayed. A weapon she wielded with expert precision. Who paid for this house? Ellie? You? No. Mom and Dad did. It is family money. And last time I checked, I am family. She took a step closer to me. I instinctively took a step back. You have had it all your life, have you not? She said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. The good grades, the praise, the inheritance, the perfect husband. You walked through life on a carpet of rose petals while I was dragging myself through the mud. That is not true. I stammered. I worked hard. So you Jinghao Ling, Jinghao Dayu. You did nothing, she snapped, her face contorting with sudden rage. You are weak, Ileana. You have always been weak. You let people walk all over you. You let Mark abuse me under your own roof because you were too stupid to see it. And now you are going to pay for it. She poked a finger into my chest. It hurt. You owe me this. She spat. You owe me for the life I never had. You owe me for the years I spent suffering while you played princess in this ivory tower. Mark is gone because he was an obstacle. He saw through me, to sure. But you are blind. And that is why you do not deserve any of this. I felt the breath leave my lungs. The brutality of her words hit me harder than any physical blow. It was a complete dismantling of my reality. She was not denying the manipulation. She was justifying it. She was telling me that my suffering was the price of her admission. Now, she said, her voice returning to that eerie calm, get his clothes out of here. I want to take a nap, and I do not want to smell his cheap cologne. I did as I was told. I do not know why. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the lingering effects of the drugs she had been feeding me. Or maybe it was the deep, ingrained belief that I really was the imposter she claimed I was. I felt a crushing weight of guilt. Guilt for Mark's arrest. Guilt for my sister's injury. Guilt for existing. I spent the next 3 hours packing Mark's suits into black garbage bags. I cried silently as I folded his shirts, the scent of him triggering fresh waves of grief. I dragged the bags down the hall, past the open door where Annie was lying in my bed, on my sheets, watching television with the volume turned up high. She did not offer to help. She just watched me, sipping my husband's wine, a small smile playing on her lips. By evening, the house had been colonized. Annie had moved her meager belongings into the master suite, but she had supplemented them with my things. She was wearing my diamond stud earrings. She had draped my favorite alpaca blanket over her legs. I retreated to the guest room, the room she had vacated. It was a cold, impersonal space. The bed was smaller, the sheets stiffer. I curled up on the mattress, feeling like an intruder in my own home. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I did not recognize. It was Mark's lawyer, Mrs. Sterling. I tried to visit Mark. He is refusing to see anyone. He says to tell you to check the cloud. He says the backup is automatic. I stared at the screen. The cloud? My heart gave a feeble thump. The camera Mark had used, it was a modern one, a smart device. If it was connected to the wireless internet, so Jinghaoling, or Jinghaodayu, I sat up, a sudden spark of adrenaline piercing through the fog of despair. But then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Annie stood in the doorway of the guest room. She was holding a plate of toast. Here, she said, tossing the plate onto the bed. Eat something. You look like a ghost. And give me your phone. What? I clutched the phone to my chest. Why? Because the press is calling, she said smoothly. Reporters are camped out at the gate. They want a statement from the brave victim and her supportive sister. I do not want you saying anything stupid. You are too emotional right now. I will handle the media. She walked over and held out her hand. Her nails were painted a deep blood red. Give it to me, Ellie. Do not make me call the police and tell them you are harassing the victim too. The threat was clear. She held all the cards. If she turned on me, if she told the police I was an accomplice or that I was unstable, I could lose everything. I could end up in a cell next to Mark. I handed her the phone. Good girl, she said, slipping it into her pocket. Now get some sleep. You have a lot of cleaning to do tomorrow. The kitchen is still a disaster. She turned and left, closing the door behind her. I heard the key turn in the lock from the outside. I was a prisoner. I sat in the dark, staring at the slice of cold toast on the paper plate. The realization settled over me like a shroud. This was not just about money. This was not just about a house. This was an execution. Annie was systematically erasing Eliana Sterling. She was taking my husband, my home, my clothes, and my voice. But as I sat there in the silence, listening to my sister humming a cheerful tune down the hall, my mind drifted back to the text message I had seen just seconds before surrendering my phone. The backup is automatic. Annie had the phone. Annie had the camera. But she did not have the passwords to Mark's computer in the study. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. It was small, fragile, and terrified, but it was there. She thought I was weak. She thought I was the spoiled little sister who would crumble under pressure, and maybe I was. But even a cornered animal will bite if you push it hard enough. And Annie Vance had just pushed me past the point of no return. For the next 3 days, I became a ghost in my own life. I learned quickly that resistance was futile. Any sign of defiance, A sharp word, a refusal to cook, a locked door, was met with Annie's weaponized victimhood. She would threaten to call the police and tell them I was harassing her. She would threaten to call the press and tell them I was an accomplice to my husband's violence. So, I stopped resisting. I went limp. I became exactly what Annie wanted me to be, a broken, submissive servant who was too medicated and too terrified to fight back. I cooked her meals. I cleaned the master bathroom while she sat in the tub, ordering me to scrub the grout harder. I washed the clothes she stole from my closet. I even brewed her tea, though I noticed she never drank the herbal blend she forced on me. I stopped drinking it, too. I would pretend to sip it, then pour it down the sink when she was not looking. Slowly, the fog in my brain began to lift. The edges of my vision sharpened. The lethargy that had weighed down my limbs began to dissipate, replaced by a cold, vibrating energy that sat in the pit of my stomach. On Friday morning, the sun was shining brightly, a cruel contrast to the darkness inside the house. Annie came down to the kitchen, wearing my sunglasses and carrying my black leather tote bag. "I am going out," she announced, grabbing an apple from the bowl I had restocked. "I need a new outfit for the preliminary hearing. I need to look sympathetic, vulnerable. Black is good for that, right?" She looked at me, waiting for validation. "Yes," I said, my voice flat and obedient. "Black is very slimming. I am taking the Mercedes," she said, twirling my car keys on her finger. "And I am using the emergency credit card. You do not mind, do you? Since you owe me?" "No," I said, keeping my eyes on the floor. "I do not mind. Just Sao Yu Ding Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than be careful." She laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "You are pathetic. Ellie, I almost feel bad for you. Almost." She patted my cheek, her nails digging slightly into my skin, and walked out. I heard the heavy front door close. I heard the garage door open. I heard the engine of my car roar to life and fade into the distance. As soon as the silence returned, I dropped the act. My posture straightened. The dull look in my eyes vanished. I ran to the window and watched until the car turned the corner at the end of the street. Then I moved. I did not go to the computer first. I went to the trash. Earlier that morning, Annie had thrown a small, white plastic bag into the kitchen bin. She had done it with a dismissive sneer, telling me to take the garbage out because it smelled like failure. I had seen a flash of something metallic inside the bag before she tied it off. I pulled the bag out of the bin and ripped it open. Inside were empty takeout containers, used tissues, and a shattered smartphone. It was not her main phone. It was an old model, the screen spiderwebbed with cracks, the casing bent as if someone had stomped on it. It was a burner phone. Why would a destitute woman running from an abusive husband need a burner phone? I ran to the utility drawer and grabbed a charging cable. I plugged it into the wall and connected the phone. For a long, agonizing minute, the screen remained black. I held my breath, praying to a God I had not spoken to in years. "Please, just give me this one thing." The battery icon flashed red. I waited. 1%, 2%. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. It was not password protected. Arrogance. I realized Annie was so sure of her victory, so sure of my incompetence, that she had not even bothered to wipe the device before destroying it. She thought smashing the screen was enough. She did not know that data lived on the motherboard, not the glass. I opened the messages. There was only one conversation thread. The contact name was saved as Dave. Dave, her abusive ex-husband. The man she claimed was hunting her down. My hands shook as I scrolled through the texts. The timestamps went back months. August 15th. Annie. She is dumber than we thought. She actually invited me to stay. Dave. Good. How is the house? Annie. Massive. You could fit 3 of our apartments in the living room. And the jewelry, Haling, 2 hash, is greater than Dave. We are going to be rich. September 2nd. Annie. The husband is a problem. He is suspicious. He watches me. Dave. Get rid of him. You know the drill. Make him the bad guy. Annie. Working on it. I need to soften her up first. The herbs are working wonders. She is practically a zombie. November 10th. The day of the arrest. Annie. It is done. He is in cuffs. I cut myself. Lots of blood. It was perfect. Dave. Did she buy it? Annie. Hook, line, and sinker. She was screaming at him to stay away from me. It was hilarious. I will have the power of attorney by Christmas. Then we sell the house and vanish. Dave, I love you. Baby, you are a genius. See you in the Bahamas. I dropped the phone on the counter. The plastic clattered loudly in the empty kitchen. A sound escaped my throat. A low, guttural noise that was half sob, half growl. It was the sound of a heart breaking and hardening at the same time. It was all Ali. Every tear, every bruise, every story about her suffering. It was a script written by 2 predators who saw me not as a sister, but as a prey animal to be harvested. Dave was not an abuser. He was her partner. He was her lover. They were laughing at me. They were planning to sell my parents' legacy and retire to the Bahamas on my dime. The rage that flooded my veins was not hot. It was ice cold. It clarified everything. I looked around my kitchen, the kitchen my mother had designed, the kitchen where Mark and I had cooked Sunday brunches, and I vowed that Annie Vance would never leave this house with a single cent. She would leave in handcuffs, but the texts were not enough. A good lawyer could argue they were fabricated, or that Dave was manipulating her. I needed a confession. I needed her to say it, out loud, to my face. While the world watched, I looked at the clock. Annie had been gone for 40 minutes. The mall was 30 minutes away. She would be gone for at least 3 hours. I grabbed my car keys, the spare set for Mark's sedan, and ran out the door. I drove like a mad woman to the nearest spy supply store in New Haven. It was a seedy little place tucked between a pawn shop and a liquor store. The kind of place I would never have stepped foot in a week ago. I marched up to the counter. I need cameras. I told the man behind the glass. Small ones, high definition, and I need audio recorders. The best you have. The clerk looked at my disheveled hair and my shaking hands. He did not ask questions. He just pointed to the display case. I bought 4 micro cameras that looked like universal serial bus chargers. I bought 3 voice-activated recorders the size of a quarter. I paid in cash from the emergency stash Mark kept in the glove compartment. I sped back home, my heart racing against the clock. I had 90 minutes left. I placed the first camera in the kitchen, plugged into the outlet above the counter where she liked to drink her wine. I placed the second one in the living room, hidden behind a stack of books on the shelf. I placed the third one in the dining room, facing the head of the table, the seat she had claimed as her own. I hid the audio recorders in the flower arrangements, one in the foyer, one in the sunroom. Then, I went to Mark's study. I bypassed the computer. I did not need the cloud backup anymore. I was creating something better. I opened the safe. Annie did not know the combination, but I did. It was my birthday. Inside, I found the deed to the house and a stack of legal documents. I picked up the landline and dialed a number I knew by heart. Mr. Henderson, our family attorney. He was a man who had served my father for 40 years. He was a shark in a three-piece suit. Ileana? His voice was rough with concern. I heard about Mark. I have been trying to reach you. I do not have much time. Arthur, I said, my voice steady and commanding. I need you to draft a document for me. Immediately. What kind of document? A transfer of assets. I said, I want a paper that looks like I am signing the house and the accounts over to Annie Vance. Ileana, absolutely not. He barked. You are under duress. I will not let you. Listen to me. I cut him off. I need it to look real, but I need you to bury a clause in the fine print. A clause that states the recipient accepts full criminal liability for perjury, fraud, and conspiracy if the transfer is signed. And I need a second document, a confession of guilt. Confession of guilt? Arthur paused. Ileana, what are you planning? I am planning to end this. I said, just draft it. Email it to me. I will print it here. And Arthur, Saoid Hao Ling, Ketu. Yes, be ready. I am going to need the police on speed dial tonight. Saoid Hao Ling. 2. I hung up. I spent the next hour cleaning. I wiped down the counters. I vacuumed the rugs. I set the dining room table with the fine china, the Wedgwood set my grandmother had brought over from England. I polished the silver until it gleamed. I created a stage for a celebration. When the garage door opened an hour later, I was standing in the kitchen, wearing an apron, chopping vegetables. Annie walked in, carrying bags from Chanel, Iguchi, and Saks Fifth Avenue. She looked flushed and happy. She dropped the bags on the floor and looked at me. What is all this? She asked, gesturing to the clean house and the smell of roasting chicken. I turned to her. I forced a smile onto my face. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. I had to channel every ounce of submission I had feigned over the last few days. I have been thinking, Annie, I said softly. You were right. She paused, kicking off her heels. Right about what? About everything. I said, I am weak. I cannot handle this. Mark, Saoud Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than the press. Saoud Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than the house. It is too much for me. I am drowning. Annie walked over to the island, her eyes narrowing slightly. And I want to make it right. I continued, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. You are the strong one. You are the only one who can save this family's legacy. So, I called the lawyer. Her eyes lit up, a predatory gleam that made my skin crawl. You called the lawyer? I nodded. I told him to draw up the papers. I am signing the house over to you. Annie, all of it, the stocks, the savings, the estate. I just want to leave. I just want to go somewhere quiet and forget this ever happened. Annie stared at me for a long moment. She was looking for the lie. She was scanning my face for any sign of deception. But all she saw was a broken woman who had finally given up. She smiled. It was a wide, terrifying grin. Well, she said, walking around the counter to hug me. It is about time you woke up. Ellie, I am proud of you. Finally, you are doing something sensible. She hugged me tight. I felt her heart beating against mine. I smelled the new perfume she had bought with my money. Let us celebrate. She whispered in my ear. A nice dinner, just the two of us sisters. And then we sign. Yes, I said, staring over her shoulder at the tiny black dot on the outlet, the camera lens that was recording her every move. Just the two of us. I pulled away and looked her in the eye. Go get changed. Annie, put on something nice. Tonight is going to be a night to remember. She laughed and grabbed her shopping bags, practically skipping toward the stairs. I watched her go. Inner monologue. Run. Annie, run while you still can. Put on your stolen silk and your blood money diamonds. Because tonight, the imposter is dying. And the woman who wakes up tomorrow will be the one who burns you to the ground. I turned back to the cutting board. I picked up the knife, the same kind of knife she had used to frame my husband. I sliced through a red pepper with a single, clean stroke. The trap was set. The cheese was on the plate. Now, I just had to wait for the rat to take a bite. The dining room was bathed in the soft, flickering glow of candlelight. I had set the table with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. The crystal wine glasses sparkled, the silver gleamed, and the roast chicken sat in the center like a sacrificial offering. Annie sat at the head of the table, wearing a black velvet dress she had bought that afternoon with my credit card. It dipped low in the front, revealing the diamond necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. She looked regal. She looked triumphant. She looked like a parasite that had finally consumed its host. I poured her another glass of wine. It was her fourth. Her cheeks were flushed, a deep, rosy pink, and her eyes were glassy, swimming with alcohol and adrenaline. To sisters, Annie slurred, raising her glass. And to fresh starts. To sisters, I echoed, touching my rim to hers. She took a long, greedy gulp, spilling a few drops of crimson liquid onto the expensive dress. She did not even notice. She was too busy admiring the room, her gaze sweeping over the paintings and the furniture as if she were already calculating their auction value. You know, Ellie, she said, leaning back in the chair, you really are making the right decision. Mark, Soyutsing Haling, 2# is greater than he was holding you back. He was so stiff, so boring. You need to be free. I nodded, cutting a small piece of chicken I had no intention of eating. I know, I just feel so guilty. About the police, about prison. Annie waved her hand dismissively. Do not be. He deserves it. Men like him always think they are untouchable. It was time someone taught him a lesson. But, Soyutsing Haling, 2# is greater than I hesitated. Looking down at my plate, what if he really did not do it? What if I am making a mistake? Annie laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound that shattered the elegance of the room. Oh, grow up, Ellie. Of course he did not do it. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced imperceptibly at the bookshelf in the corner, where the tiny black eye of the camera was recording every frame. What do you mean? I asked softly. Annie leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, though in the empty house it sounded like a shout. Mark is a Boy Scout. He would not hurt a fly. That is why it was so easy. She giggled, taking another sip of wine. Easy? I pressed, feigning confusion. To break him, she said. The bruises, I did those myself with a vacuum cleaner hose and some purple eyeshadow. And the knife? God, that was my masterpiece. I nicked my arm, screamed like a banshee, and he just stood there. He froze. He looked like a deer in headlights. It was pathetic. I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced my face to remain blank. And the drugs? The tea? Vitamins mixed with benzodiazepines. She shrugged. I got them from Dave. He knows a guy, just enough to keep you compliant, just enough to make you doubt your own mind. It is called gaslighting. Sweetie, look it up. I gripped the edge of the table under the tablecloth until my knuckles turned white. So, Dave, Xiao Yu Jing Hao Ling, 2 hash is greater than he is in on this? In on it? Annie scoffed. It was his idea. We have been planning this since I got your Christmas card last year. You looked so happy in the photo, so perfect in your big house with your perfect husband. It made me sick. Dave said we should take it. He said you did not earn it, and he was right. She pointed a fork at me, a piece of chicken dangling from the tines. You were just born lucky. Ileana, that is your only talent, being lucky. But luck runs out. Now, it is my turn. Dave and I are going to sell this place, take the cash, and live like kings in the Caribbean. And you can go find some small apartment and live a quiet, sad little life. It is what you are suited for. I stared at her. The hatred I felt was so pure, so absolute. It was almost clarifying. She was not just a bad sister. She was a sociopath. She felt no remorse. She felt no love. She only felt hunger. I stood up. My legs were steady. Well, I said, walking over to the sideboard, if we are going to do this, we should do it properly. I picked up the leather folder I had prepared. Inside were the documents Arthur had emailed me, printed on thick, official bond paper. Here's the transfer of assets, I said, placing the folder in front of her. It gives you everything. The house, the accounts, the cars. All you have to do is sign. Annie's eyes lit up. She practically snatched the pen from my hand. She flipped the folder open, barely glancing at the text. Where do I sign? She asked, her voice trembling with greed. Right there, at the bottom, I said, pointing to the line. And initiate every page. She scribbled her name. Annie Vance, Annie Vance, Annie Vance. She signed away my life with a flourish, humming a little tune as she did it. She did not read the paragraph above her signature, the one written in dense legalese that stated the signatory confessed to all charges of perjury, filing a false police report, and conspiracy to commit fraud, and that this document served as a voluntary surrender to law enforcement. She flipped to the last page. She signed one final time. Done, she exclaimed, slamming the folder shut. It is mine. She stood up, raising her arms in victory. She spun around, laughing, drunk on wine and power. I own it all. She screamed at the ceiling. I finally win. I watched her for a moment. Then, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen. The live stream application was running. The viewer count showed 2 people watching. One was Arthur Henderson, my lawyer. The other was Detective Miller, the lead investigator on Mark's case. I ended the stream. I looked at Annie. My expression changed. The mask of the submissive, broken sister fell away, revealing the cold. A hard face of a woman who had just orchestrated an execution. You do not win. Annie, I said. She stopped spinning. She looked at me, confused by the change in my tone. What did you say? I said, you do not win. A heavy pounding echoed from the front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the battering ram of authority. Police! Open up. Annie froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her as pale as the napkins on the table. She looked at the door, then back at me. What is that? She whispered, "Who is that?" "That is the consequences of your actions," I said calmly. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled the tiny camera out from behind the books. The red light was still blinking. I held it up so she could see it. "Smile?" "Annie," I said coldly, my voice devoid of emotion. "You are the star of the show." The front door crashed open. Heavy boots thundered down the hallway. Annie looked at the folder on the table. She looked at the camera in my hand. And finally, the realization hit her. Her mouth opened in a silent scream of horror as the illusion of her victory shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The dinner party ended not with a toast, but with the metallic click of handcuffs. Detective Miller entered the dining room first, his badge glinting under the chandelier light. Behind him were two uniformed officers, their faces grim and unamused by the opulent setting. Annie stood frozen by the table, the pen still in her hand, the signed confession lying open like a wound on the white tablecloth. "Annie Vance, you are under arrest for extortion, fraud, and filing a false police report," Miller said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. Annie dropped the pen. It clattered against the fine china. She looked from the detective to me, her eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. "No," she stammered, taking a step back. "This is a mistake. She told me to sign it. She tricked me." The officers moved in. They grabbed her arms. The arms she had claimed were so bruised and battered, and pulled them behind her back. Annie began to struggle, kicking out with her expensive heels. "Ellie, tell them," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Tell them I am the victim." "You cannot do this to your own sister." I stood perfectly still, clutching the tiny camera in my hand. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a movie rather than witnessing the destruction of my only remaining family. I gave Detective Miller the camera and the folder. "It is all there," I said quietly. "The audio, the video, the text messages from the burner phone." She admitted everything. Annie's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. The sophisticated facade melted away, revealing the rot underneath. As they dragged her toward the door, she stopped pleading and started screaming. She hurled insults that would have made a sailor blush, calling me a traitor, a snake, and a cold-hearted bitch. I watched her go. I watched the heavy oak door slam shut, cutting off her voice. The house fell silent. The roast chicken sat in the center of the table, cold and untouched. The candles flickered, casting long, lonely shadows against the walls. I blew them out, one by one. Mark came home the next morning. He did not look like the man who had left. His suit was wrinkled, his face was unshaven, and there were dark, bruised circles under his eyes. He stood in the foyer, holding a plastic bag containing his personal effects, looking at the house as if he did not recognize it. I ran to him. I wanted to throw my arms around him, to bury my face in his chest and cry until the nightmare washed away. But something in his posture stopped me. He was stiff. His shoulders were hunched, protecting himself. "Mark," I whispered. He looked at me. His eyes were not angry, which would have been easier to handle. They were tired. They were filled with a profound, exhausting disappointment. "Is she gone?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Yes," I said. "She is in custody. They denied bail this time." Mark nodded slowly. He dropped his keys into the bowl, the same bowl where Annie had left her burner phone. He walked past me into the living room and sank onto the sofa. He put his head in his hands. I stood in the doorway, feeling small, I realized then that an apology was not going to fix this. I had let a predator into our sanctuary. I had doubted him. I had watched him get arrested and did nothing. Those were not cracks that could be spackled over with words. I am so sorry. Mark, I said, my voice trembling. I know. He said through his hands, I know you are. Ellie, but I need a minute. I just need to sit here and know that nobody is watching me. I retreated to the kitchen. I started cleaning up the remnants of the dinner party. I scraped the food into the trash. I washed the wine glasses. I scrubbed the table until my hands were raw. I needed the physical pain to distract me from the emotional hollow in my chest. That night, we slept in the same bed, but we lay on opposite edges of the mattress. A vast ocean of white sheets separating us. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. The house was safe again. The monster was gone. But as I closed my eyes, I realized that the woman who had opened the door to Annie that rainy night was gone too. In her place was someone harder, colder, and infinitely more alone. 6 months later, I stood in the foyer of the colonial estate for the last time. The house was empty. The furniture was gone, sold at auction or donated to charity. The walls were bare, stripped of the art and photographs that had documented 3 generations of my family. My voice echoed slightly as I gave instructions to the movers. Be careful with that box, I said. It is fragile. Mark was waiting in the car. We were moving to a condo in Boston, 2 hours away. It was smaller, modern, and anonymous. It had no guest room. We were starting over, rebuilding our marriage brick by brick. It was hard work, and some days were better than others. But we were trying. We had survived the fire, and now we were sifting through the ashes. I checked the mailbox one last time. There was a single letter. It was stamped with the seal of the Connecticut Department of Correction. I did not open it. I did not need to. I knew what it said. Annie had been writing to me every week since her sentencing. She got 8 years. The judge had not been lenient, especially after hearing the audio of her laughing about self-mutilation. I walked to the trash can at the end of the driveway. I hovered the letter over the bin. I knew a secret that Annie did not know I knew. Back in the beginning, when I was cleaning up the guest room after her first week, I had found a crumpled receipt from a pharmacy in her trash. It was for prenatal vitamins. And later, when she was parading around in my clothes, I had noticed the slight, telltale swelling of her ankles and the way she avoided the soft cheeses on the charcuterie board. Annie was pregnant. The baby belonged to Dave. In her accomplice, I could have told the police. I could have told the social workers immediately, but I chose silence. I let her stand trial. I let her get sentenced. I let her enter the prison system while carrying a child. I knew what would happen. She would give birth in the infirmary, handcuffed to a bed. She would have 24 hours with the infant. And then, because she had no family willing to take custody, and the father was a known felon currently on the run, the state would intervene. Child Protective Services would take the baby. Her child would go into the system, the foster care system, the very nightmare she used to tell me she was terrified of when we were kids. She would spend the next 8 years in a concrete cell, wondering where her child was, wondering if they were safe, powerless to control a single aspect of their life. It was cruel. It was heartless. It was exactly the kind of poetic justice that a woman like Annie deserved. She wanted to steal my family. She lost her own. She wanted a free house. She got a cell. She wanted to be taken care of. The state would take care of her for a very long time. I dropped the unopened letter into the trash. I looked back at the house, the grand, beautiful, cursed legacy of my parents. I felt nothing, no nostalgia, no regret. I turned my back on it, walked down the driveway, and got into the car next to my husband. "Ready?" Mark asked, taking my hand. I looked at his hand, the hand I had once feared. Now the only thing that felt real in the world. I squeezed it tight. "Drive," I said. As we pulled away, I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror. I did not look back again. The imposter was dead. Ileana Sterling was finally, truly free.